It's all about how do you show up? How do you speak to clients so that they trust you? How do you speak to clients so that they understand, why you want them to do what you tell them? Why you can't just fix it right away, but you actually have to follow the law and dot the I's and cross the T's.
Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Love podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I am excited for this conversation. It's a little bit different than a lot of the conversations we have around your business. This is going to be delving into your own personal skill set and love a change of pace and excited to have a conversation with Elizabeth Bachman. Before I introduce her to you, I apologize to the audience for my voice. I'm recovering from a cold, so hopefully we make it through this. But if it sounds different, it is. And you're going to be stuck with this sound for the next 6 weeks because we batch our podcast recording. So um, we're going to be using this voice all day long. Elizabeth Bachman is the go-to person for advanced level training in speaking, presentation skills, career development, and leadership. With a lifetime spent perfecting the art of presenting, she helps high level clients master a message that brings them the results they need and the recognition they deserve. A sought after speaker and strategist in Silicon Valley and internationally, Elizabeth works with leaders and influencers who need to become concise and compelling presenters. She helps them present as smart, down to earth, loose, friendly, even funny, and still be taken seriously. As an opera director, Elizabeth spent over 30 years directing such luminaries as Luciano Pavarotti, and I'm going to mess these up, and Placido Domingo, in more than 50 operas around the world, fluent in five languages. My grandmother had you beat. She had 7 languages, but this is incredible. I'm always in awe of people who are able to pick up other languages. Fluent in 5 languages, she brings that global experience to her clients. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Moshe. And my grandmother spoke 8 languages, so she was like she had me beat too. Uh, but she always encouraged us to think internationally, to think about the world, think globally. And so being in opera gave me a chance to travel the world and speak all sorts of different languages, and I loved it.
Yeah, awesome. So Elizabeth, let's just take just a couple of minutes to learn a little bit about you. I read the official bio, which gives you the credentials, the accolades. It's
Mhm.
what you do. But how did you get into this, and what makes you an expert on the area of speaking, presenting? And then we'll dive into how this is relevant to our audience who are law firm owners.
Well, I like to think that I've been dedicated to the art of great communication since I first walked on stage at the age of 5. And afterwards, I heard my mom tell one of her friends that I was the best damn bunny rabbit ever to grace the stage of the Hillside School. And I thought, cool, they like this. And I was hooked. So I grew up thinking I was going to be a famous actress on Broadway, although I was in Portland, Oregon, so I had a pretty fuzzy idea of what that meant, and realized that I was actually better as a director. So I went from acting to directing opera singers, and really that's where I found my artistic home in terms of helping people show up as, they would learn how to sing from somebody else, but I would teach them how to act and be convincing and how to really be compelling. And for that matter, every audition is a job interview. So a lot of the skills that I learned helping opera singers, I now use helping others interview for jobs. And then I got to the point where it was time to run my own company. So I founded an opera company and did that for 11 years. And finally, I got to the point where I realized it was starting to be work and not fun. And running a nonprofit is hard enough. It's working in the arts is really hard. You have to love it. And I got to the point where I thought, if I don't stop now, I'm going to lose the ability to be moved by the music. And by then, I was helping friends of mine give speeches. And so it was an easy transition into presentation skills, which is so much more than speaker training. In my world, in my head at least, it's all about how do you show up? Who are you talking to? How do you get them to do what you want them to do? I started doing speaking when I founded an opera company, and that's a nonprofit, and I had to raise $100,000 just to launch it. It was, it wasn't the size of the Met. It was a small company, but just to start, I had to raise $100,000, and to do that, I had to speak. And I'd been performing my whole life, but when it came to speaking about what I was doing and asking people to give me money, basically selling my idea was was hard. And I actually find this with people who run law firms when I work with them as clients is they want to be doing the law. They want to be solving the problems. They don't want to be talking about what it is that they do and why you should pay them. And so and that was me. I knew how to do that. I knew how to do the thing to get people to pay me to let me do it was I had to learn public speaking techniques. And so that's really where I started in the presentation skills world. How do you show up so that you get the recognition that you deserve and the results that you need?
So, interestingly enough, I think that what you do is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what you do is you primarily are helping people who are speaking on stages, right? Um, so is that
No, no.
sure? Let's fix
Okay.
that.
It's a lot more than that. So speaking on stages is part of it. And people often think that's why I say presentation skills, not
Hmm.
speaker training, because then people say, oh, it puts them in the box. That means I have to get up and present a keynote. But it's all about how do you show up? How do you speak to clients so that they trust you? How do you speak to clients so that they understand why you have to do, why you want them to do what you tell them, why you can't just fix it right away, but you actually have to follow the law and dot the I's and cross the T's. Uh, and how can you be interesting? So one of the things I find is it's really easy to drown people in data. And so a lot of what I do is teaching people who are really, really smart and who know a whole lot about what they have to do, about something, their specialty, how to talk about it in a networking event or to a client or to a colleague or maybe yes up on a stage in a way that people go, oh, wow, cool. I get it. I understand what's the problem that they solve, and that's me. So, oh, I have to go talk to that person. So it's a
Okay.
lot more than speaking on the stage.
Yeah, so let me boil this down for our audience because I want to make sure I before we even get started in the conversation, I need to make sure that you, the listener, understand why this is relevant to you. So there is a very small subset of attorneys and law firm owners out there who are going and speaking at conferences. Then from there, there's two other places. Well, unless you're doing litigation, then obviously then you're speaking in court. But let's leave litigation off the table for now. When you're running your business, there's two places where you have a prime opportunity to be presenting, to be sharing with somebody where you need to share it in a way that is engaging, that's going to draw them in, that's going to tell them a story, that's going to lead them to a result. And one is in sales when you're speaking with a potential client. And the second is networking when you're speaking with other attorneys or with your potential target market or somebody who's going to be a referrer for you. And that is where I want to concentrate our conversation with Elizabeth today is in that area, which is really relevant to everybody listening to this podcast. So, Elizabeth, let me ask you this. There's a lot of speaking coaches out there. There's a lot of information out there. I mean, there's some really well-known stuff like Story Brand, I think by Donald Miller, and other things like that. We had somebody on our podcast in the past talking about how to develop your story, your origin story, stuff like that. What is your secret sauce when it comes to talking to somebody about presenting? Is there a kind of a framework that you use to have somebody you can always reuse this no matter what the situation and go back to it and have the structure you need to present in a way that's going to be compelling?
One of my favorite structures, and this is usually the one I start with, is what I call the problem solution benefit model. And it's a really old classic, but it's kind of a cliche because it works, which is what's the problem that you solve? And the reason why this matters is because the natural thing to do when someone says, "What do you do?" is to say, "Well, I do this, and this, and this, and this, and this." And it's all about you, not about them. So, rule number one is that you make it about them. Make it about the client or the potential client, the listener. Who's listening and what do they care about? So the things I'm talking about in this podcast are going to be different from things I'm talking about if I'm, to a different group, to a corporate group, or if I'm talking to, different kinds of things. What matters is what's their problem that you can solve. And if you start out, say, with your introduction and you say, the problem is there are so many really smart people who know a whole lot about something complicated. And yet, when it comes time to talk about it, they have a hard time being concise or compelling. And that's a way I would start. That's one of the ways I would talk about what I do. And then someone who's listening to that goes, "Oh, yeah, I know I'm not very interesting, or I would like to be more interesting, or I have a hard time keeping it to 30 seconds in a networking group or the Chamber of Commerce or something." So you say the problem because the people who have the problem are going to go, "Oh, that's me." And then you talk about how you solve it. But that's really something small, so short. This is like the first time you're talking to us. So you don't want to go into all the how. You want to talk about how you solve it and then why should they care? What's the benefit? So the problem, the solution, and the benefit. And so, for instance, I would talk about how people have a hard time being concise and compelling. And then what I would say is, I help them have a message that brings them the results they need and the recognition that they deserve. And I read those two, results and recognition, because those are the things people mostly come to me for. I work a lot with women, especially women lawyers who aren't being listened to, and women scientists a lot, and also women who are over 40 and not being listened to because they're taken for granted. So recognition, it is one of the basic human needs, and that's one of the benefits you get by being a good speaker, being a good presenter. But you'll notice that the solution, I say, is help them derive a, help them create a message that it's just those four words. Then, if they say, "Ooh, that sounds interesting, and I want that benefit, I want that result," then they'll say, "Oh, tell me more." And then I can go into the next story and the next story and the next story.
It's very obvious to me in a sales conversation where you're talking to somebody who is having a conversation with you because they have a problem that you can solve, right? So
Mhm.
it's very easy for, well, I don't know, a lot of people struggle with this, but it is very easy to just kind of explore what that problem is and get really clear about it with your potential client. Also figure out how important it is for them to solve that and set the stage for a good sales conversation and being able to demonstrate how your firm solves that. Where I'm a little bit more unclear is in the networking conversation, right? Like, how do I
Mhm.
make the networking conversation not be about me when whatever problem that the other person has is not necessarily something I solve, right? So, like, we can talk about them and challenges that they're having, but how do we approach that conversation where it's not we're not trying to lead them to, hey, we're the solution.
Well, it depends. If they're a potential referral partner, then you would talk about the problem that their clients might have that you would solve. So the problem might be, uh, say you're a business attorney. You help people um, create their businesses, and you're an estate lawyer. So you might say, there are a lot of people who are setting up businesses, and you're helping them with all the logistics of doing that. But have they thought about how this fits into their estate? Have they thought about how you incorporate that into your will or your trust? I don't. I just made that one up off the spot. But in a networking situation, do a general introduction and talk about the problems that you solve that maybe somebody is would listen to. You don't know who you're talking to yet. When you're talking to somebody specifically who says, "Oh, I have clients with that problem and this is something I don't do," then you can help with that. So I work with a lot of, say, business strategists who have clients who have a hard time explaining why they're different. What makes them different from this lawyer or that lawyer or the other lawyer? And that's one of the pieces that I work on.
Yeah, it's interesting because in networking, in general, in any conversation, the rule of thumb that you can live by is let them speak, right? Like, just people like to
Hmm.
talk about themselves. They like to share, and the more that you let somebody speak, the more that they feel empowered, confident, the more you
Hmm.
fed their ego, and the more memorable that conversation is, right?
Hmm.
So it's almost like you need to have this down to a science so that if you're talking to somebody for 10 minutes and they're doing 8 minutes of talking, that you can encapsulate what you want to share in that in the remaining sliver of time that you're standing next to them. Um,
Well, yeah. So keep
excuse
going.
me. Um, I think some people like to call that your elevator pitch or something like that, but do you have any pointers on how to kind of refine that?
Absolutely. So I I come from theater, and so I believe in rehearsing. I believe in practicing. And if you practice your elevator speech, then you can really hone it into something that's polished and memorable, and it's easy and it flows off the tongue. And you also have to remember, this is something I know from my opera days, is that speaking is a physical act, just like singing is. So you have to train your lips and your tongue and your breath to be able to say what you want to say smoothly. I mean, imagine how long it took me to be smoothly say international opera director and presentation skills trainer. I had to practice that. So when you
Certainly a
have that
mouthful. You should make an
practiced, yeah,
acronym for it.
yes, exactly. Well, you want it easy to remember. So the other thing is that then you can spotlight what their problem is and see if you can help with that. Tell them something that would be useful for them. And also, just on general networking principles, if they have an issue that's not your department, then you could say, "Oh, I should probably connect you to my friend Moshe because he's the person you really need to talk to." And then you get, I don't recommend clients. People say, "Well, I need more clients." And when I'm networking, I don't like to do that because we don't really know each other. I don't know your work. But when I could say, "Oh, well, so who's a good referral partner for you?" Well, if you're an accountant and I know someone who's an estate lawyer, you should know each other and connect. And then it's up to them to connect to see if it's a fit or not. I feel like I have delivered value by putting two people together. And then I also note who are the referral partners that are good for me. And someone says, who would be useful for you? And then I can say who the good referral partners are.
Yeah, I love that, and really having this honed in your back pocket. You just imagine all our listeners now standing in front of the mirror rehearsing their elevator pitch. But what makes up that elevator pitch? Like, what are the key components that you want to make sure you include so that you have not just you have it practiced, but you have the right thing practiced?
Well, I like the problem solution benefit formula to start. But then here's the other thing. The reason for a 30-second elevator pitch is to get someone to say, "Ooh, tell me more." So you've got to have other stories. You have to know what else you're going to say. When they say, "Tell me more," then you could say, "Well, for instance, I could do this, or I could do this, or I just helped somebody with this problem, etc." The first time I learned this formula, I was in early training to be a presentation skills trainer, and I got up in front of the group. I had my 30 seconds all perfect, and then they said, "Yeah, but you have 90 seconds." And I went, I hadn't thought past the first 30 seconds. So that's the other thing, is you want to have several things that you can say. And the other thing about stories is that stories are like raisins in a muffin. Stories are there to illustrate the information that you're delivering. So, for instance, I had a client who was an employment lawyer some years ago, and he hated speaking. But there was a day when he had to jump in and talk to the clients about what the new laws were and the new things that they were going to have to do. And so we worked together so that he could be interesting, talking about what they cared about, and they loved it. And he turned out that it actually wasn't as scary as he thought once he got past the first time. So he used stories to illustrate the the data that he had to give. He had to give them the legal information. And then you could say, you could think of it as, and use a metaphor. Or you can tell your clients, if you have to do this and it's going to affect the clients, you can tell them it's like something else. So, like I just said, like stories are like raisins in a muffin. That's an image that people can, it's a hook that people remember. Because after all, we learn about the world from the stories that we grow up with, the stories our parents tell us. And then every single ad on TV is a 30-second story. So if you're curious about storytelling, start watching the ads and analyzing how they choose to tell that story. They're not telling you what's in that Volvo. They're not telling you what's under the hood of that Volvo. They are giving the impression of a family safely driving through the snow because Volvo is talking about how it's such a safe car to drive. But they don't ever say that. It's all how they tell the story.
Yeah, it does make it memorable. But the other thing about if you share a story of what you've done for a client or a client
Hmm.
win, the other thing that does is it gives you, um, uh, it gives you authority, right? Like it
Absolutely.
demonstrates your expertise. It demonstrates you being able to get the solution for your clients. So it kind of does double duty, as being a great way of explaining what you do, but also, throwing those testimonials in. Um, Alex
Yeah, those
Hormozy is
those
a
are stories.
well-known,
Testimonials are stories. Metaphors
yeah,
are stories.
yes, Alex Hormozy is a well-known individual, author of 3 business books, and he has almost an entire book just written on how your business is built on testimonials, right? Like
Hmm.
you need to have all of those stories from your clients about how you were able to help them. And I once heard him speak at an event. This was back in 2017, And he said that like every person that you have a conversation with thinks that they're unique and they're different.
Hmm.
And when you share a story, they're going to say, "Yeah, but I'm different, and doesn't pertain to me because I'm so and so." And by having many different stories, you can use the right story, pick the story that is more relevant to them. So if you're talking with a potential client and they're a college kid who got a DUI, you can share other stories of college kids who you helped,
Right.
and pull stories from people who they would understand. And you can use one story of somebody whose parents helped them out, and another story where they didn't have parents in a position to help them out, and they had to solve this on their own, and cover the bases of them thinking, yeah, but I'm not in that situation. And you kind of cover both sides of it. So stories could be really powerful, and allow you to really drive that conversation forward, and make it not just memorable but useful for the other party. Um,
Here's just, I want to just add to that, though, that those stories, you have to write them and then you have to practice saying them. And one of the traps that people fall into all the time is they'll write out what they want to say. And then when they get up and they start to talk about it, they'll realize that what works on the page doesn't work when you speak it. You know, I did a talk about called The Expert Trap, 3 5-minute hacks for engaging your listeners. And then I realized that hacks on a video call was it's not a word that you can understand. It makes sense when you see it on the page, but it doesn't make sense when you hear it. I changed it to fixes, which is, with the F, and it's the unvoiced consonant, but it's a consonant you can understand, and the X. And that made it much interesting, much more easy to understand. And I have to say, that is something that I learned from 30 years in the opera business, working with people in multiple languages, is how do you, good old diction. Opera singers have to learn how to sing in other languages and be understandable. And it's one of the things, especially since we're in such an international business world these days, one of the things that people don't think about is how do I sound? So that's a big part of what I do. I have when I do storytelling training, I had a get it done day where you actually write your story, practice your story, and then say it out loud, which is, it's the delivery style is as important as the words, if not more so. So that's, if you've got good stories, great, write them down, but practice them. Make sure you can say them. Make sure you don't have a word that no one's going to understand in there.
okay, we have just a couple more minutes before we wrap up. Is there is there any like foundational, really important point that you think that we should share with the listeners that we didn't cover in this uncovering of the story, and how to position it, and the problem solution benefit framework? Uh, is there any key component to what you teach, or help people
Yeah.
with, that you feel like we really should cover before we before we end?
Rule number one is match the message to the room. Make it about them. Use a strategic empathy to put yourself in the shoes of your listeners. Why should they care? Stories are about you, but they're for them. And then rule number two is try not to fall into the expert trap, which is the expert trap is too much how, not enough why. Don't drown them in data. Make sure that they understand why they care. And if you're doing a presentation, if you're doing a presentation about a matter of law where you do have to drown them in data, then include stories to illustrate it, metaphors.
Yeah, I was going to say metaphors is a really good one that you can use. You don't have to find an actual story that you can use. But what I've found, there's somebody that I got really close to recently. His name is Sean Callaghy. He's becoming well known with his Unblinded brand. We had him at our Law Firm Growth Summit this past year. Um, Sean one of the things he does really well is he uses movies to make his
Hmm.
point. So he'll reference a movie, a specific scene in a movie, and he'll tell the story of that scene in the movie to
Hmm.
demonstrate what he's trying to, to tell you or bring out. That now that takes a certain unique individual and talent, right? You got to know your
Well,
movies,
and
you
it
know your
takes an
scenes.
audience that's gonna understand what the movie is. So I work internationally, and so I'm very careful about metaphors that make sense. I had a Swedish client who once I said something about going down the rabbit hole, and she said, "What does that mean?" And I said, "Well, Alice in Wonderland, of course." And she said, "I never read Alice in Wonderland. That's some Disney movie, right?" But she didn't know that it refers to Alice going down the rabbit hole. So the metaphor didn't mean anything to her. So that's a thing to think about. Movies are great if you're talking to people who go to the movies and who saw those movies.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the movies that he was using, but he did a good job of
Mm-hmm.
giving the cliff notes of what it was about and what that scene portrayed,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to understand it. So it's very interesting, and I think that can be done, but you have to your point, you have to understand that your audience may not have seen it, right? So you can't just say, "Hey, in Rocky 2, he did the X, Y, and Z," right? Like you got to give a little bit more color to it and help them to understand
Mm-hmm.
what was happening and what the character was struggling with, and and so on.
I
um
think of it as cultural awareness, which is, again, working internationally. I've lived and worked internationally since I was 17 years old, which was a few decades ago. So it's a cultural awareness of what metaphor is going to make sense to them. Again, rule number one, use strategic empathy to put yourself in their shoes.
Okay. We're going to wrap it up here, folks. And Elizabeth, what I like to do as I close out a show is two things. One parting piece of advice or wisdom for our audience. Number two, how can they find out more about you? Is there something you want to share, some place you want them to go if they want to explore your expertise and take the conversation further than what we covered on this podcast?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to say for anyone who feels like they aren't compelling enough as a presenter when they're speaking, that you can shift the way you're perceived by shifting how you communicate. It doesn't change what you're saying, it's just how you communicate really matters. And the best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I'm Elizabeth with a Z, like the Queen of England, and Bachman, Bachman. And I talk a lot on. There's a lot on LinkedIn. You can find out what to do and how to get help. And the best way to do that is to reach out and find me there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Really appreciate you being here
Thank
today.
you.
Folks, you've been listening to the Profit with Love podcast. We love having you here. If this is your first time listening to the show, make sure to hit that subscribe button because we release a new episode every single Thursday, and we'll be back with another amazing one in 1 week on Thursday morning. Um, we also have over 500 episodes that you can binge on and listen to your heart's content. They're really, really valuable stuff. I mean, I have had conversations with attorneys who are just getting started and attorneys who are, pulling in 50 million in annual revenue and have a team of 300 plus. And all of those folks are listening to the show and they're gaining value from the show. I've had clients who built their business up to multi millions by just taking the advice that they heard on this show and implementing that. So what you should think about is every time you listen to an episode, don't just listen for entertainment, but look for one takeaway action that you can do from the episode, and let's execute on that. Really want you to not just be here for the entertainment, but to be here to actually use it as a tool to leverage your business, to grow your business. And if you're unsure about where you should be taking your business, what your next steps should be, we offer a free strategy session where you can talk to somebody on our team and they'll explore the challenges that you have, the growth, where you want to grow your business to, and help you to see a path forward of getting through those challenges. And if it makes sense for you to work with us and get supported by me and my team to get to do that, obviously that will be discussed with you at the end of the call, but the call is absolutely free and there's no obligation. And you can book it at profitwithlaw.com/strategy session, profitwithlaw.com/strategy session. That's it. We'll see you next week on another amazing interview. Take care and enjoy your week. Bye for now.